Okie dokie. So just a couple of things I wanted to bring you up to speed with in terms of Startup Huddle Mandurah and a couple of initiatives that are happening. First of all, you've probably seen that the format of our monthly meetings has changed. We're now offering weekly sessions on a Monday evening. And when we started those, they were just general sessions where we were getting on and just updating and checking in with each other. Oh, here's Trina. I'll just wait for her to come on board before we continue. Hi, Trina. Can you hear us? Do you want to just turn your microphone on and let me know that you can hear us okay? Hi, Trina. Are you there? Not sure that she's got her audio on. Okay, we'll just continue. So yeah, they were just general sessions. But what I've managed to do is I've reached out to a number of people in the Peel region. Trina, have you got your microphone on?
Actually, I thought I'd use headset. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Did you want to just pop your microphone off for the time being?
Off.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah. And then we'll let you back on in a little while. But welcome. Thanks for being here. We've only just started, so I'm just going through a few little businessy things, and we are recording as well. So I've managed to reach out to a few people in the Peel region, and they have agreed to come on as guests. Obviously, this evening we have Chad here with us, Managing Director of Global Entrepreneurship Network Australia. Next Monday evening, we have Julie Broad, who is the business advisor from the Business Advisory Southwestern Peel. Monday, the 4th of May, we have Ollie Bazani. Some of you might remember Ollie from Make Place, but he's now working with a fabulous group of people, Skills of the Modern Age. So he'll be coming on to have a chat about what he's been doing and how skills of the modern age are having an impact. On the 11th of May, we have Andrew McCarroll, who's the manager from Peel Chamber of Commerce and Industry. 8th of June, we have lovely Christy, who's with us tonight, updating us on some info around the Peel region and representing Peel Development Commission. And we also have Rhys Williams, the Mayor, who has agreed to come on. We're just negotiating a date with his personal secretary, but hopefully I'll be able to give you a date for his session as well. If any of you have any other ideas for people that you think would be good to have as guests, just let me know, email or message me, and I'll definitely follow up. I have actually put an invitation out to the Shire of Murray as well. Leslie's having a problem getting on. Okay. Yeah, so that's what'll be happening over the next few weeks. So hopefully we'll have people join us for those sessions, but we'll also be recording them as well. And the other piece of news I just wanted to share with you tonight was that Dave Monk, from 12 Hats Media, who is one of our sponsors, has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, and he's now ready to launch the Startup Huddle Mandurah podcast. And so we've got a bit of an idea about who we might be inviting. Hi, Praveen. How are you?
Hi, good, thanks.
That's good. Who we might be asking to come on as guests. So we will be following up with all of the guest presenters that are coming on board over the following weeks and offering them the opportunity to also be interviewed for the podcast. So Chad, look out for that invitation. That'll be coming to you soon. And so I'm pretty excited about this podcast. I think it'll be another way that Startup Huddle Mandurah can outreach to the community, particularly during these times, these challenging times, and also offer, some of our business people around the region the opportunity to, present their businesses and to keep connected with the community, which I think is going to be really important as well. So that was the main news that I've got to share with you guys tonight. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest tonight, Chad. So Praveen and Trina, just for your benefit, I'd run through before that the format of the presentation or the session tonight will be that Chad will introduce himself and have a bit of a chat. There's a few questions that we've got from people that I'll be putting to Chad, and he'll be responding to those. So if you do have any questions yourself and you'd like them asked, just use the chat feature, and we'll get started. So, Chad, over to you. Thanks very much for being here this evening and making the time to come on board and have a chat with us. As you know, Chad is the Managing Director of Global Entrepreneurship Network Australia, and he'll probably talk a little bit about that. But he is also doing some really amazing and fascinating work. As he said, he's a data and statistics man, and so he'll be sharing the other things that he's been doing as well with us, and then we'll open up to questions. So thanks very much, Chad. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Veronica, and absolutely pleasure and honor to be here with you guys. I figured I'd just share a little bit as far as my background and also some of the work that I'm currently doing in Australia. And obviously top of mind right now for everyone is COVID-19 and the impacts that has, and maybe some of what we're seeing there, both not just across Australia, but globally, on how it's affecting entrepreneurs, established businesses, startups, technology, both now and into the future. So as Veronica mentioned, I am the Managing Director for the Global Entrepreneurship Network, which the main focus there is how do we create a national approach for Australia to bring it together. Quite often we do have some strong approaches within the States, which has emerged quite rapidly from 2015, predominantly through the ideas boom. So a lot of support out there at the state level, but we're trying to bring that together for Australia and then connect that to the over 170 member organizations or member countries around the world. But I'm also the director for a company called Startup Status. And what that does, it helps regions build capability to support entrepreneurs better. You know, how do we get the local governments, the universities, the corporations, the startup communities, the entrepreneur communities, established businesses, all working together to help new types of businesses? Because we know that within our regions, we do need new ways of thinking and quite often new industries or existing industries to adapt. And so we help them do that. I am currently based out of Queensland, just outside of Brisbane and Ipswich. So I've been doing this here for the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm also a research fellow with QUT, as well as supporting USQ on both the data side of things, as well as engaging predominantly in regional areas. As far as my background goes, I actually grew up in Seattle. It's a Seattle accent, not Canadian, but I'll take either one because I went to high school in Canada up in Vancouver. We had a manufacturing company over there, and it was interesting. We grew it to about 80 staff, about 10 mil a year, and around the turn of the century. But then around 2001, 9/11 happened. And it was fascinating, challenging at the time. But the experience I had there feels very much like the experience we're having now. You have this massive, sudden, immediate impact on the economy. You have people mobilizing around a common enemy, a common foe that we all need to mobilize against. You see the companies and the communities binding together. But you also see massive disruptions in the fundamental way we do business. Like in the US, travel shut down, consumer spending shut down, a lot of things just stopped. And so we're seeing a lot of similar things now. One of the differences in the US, things got back together in some areas. But one of the things I'll be talking about tonight, and probably tease it out a bit more in the chat with Veronica, is that the impact that we experienced there wasn't, we felt it immediately, but what we actually experienced was long-term. And it was the supply chain issues that we encountered. And we didn't make it. As a business, we were already challenged and stressed. We were already out long terms with our suppliers, and within about 6 to 8 months, we went under. And it was those long-term impacts that we had to watch out for. And that was the turn of the century, around 2000. Obviously, startups weren't that big of a thing. It wasn't the kind of entrepreneurial conversations that we're having now. And that actually is what got me into doing what I'm doing. I always thought, what could you do with 80 staff that had been working together that needed to think new, needed to think differently? Hey, Leslie.
Yeah, pop it in. I can't really pop it in for these ones myself. Consider the person does it, but there you go.
And so so how do you do new? And so that got me into some of the things we're doing now. And I've been thinking about that as I'm watching the things unfold in regards to COVID-19. And what we've seen is, first, there's a focus on how do we respond? And over the last 2 to 3 weeks, this massive government funding, this support, how do we keep the employees in the very near term, 3-4 weeks? But what we've experienced over the last 4 or 5 weeks or so is now what are we talking about? The road to recovery. How do we re-enter? How do we recover? And what does that look like? How do we turn on businesses that have been hibernating for the last 3 or 4 weeks? Some of them may be hibernating for another 3 or 4. Do we start up again? And then the third stage is resilience. And so how do we respond? How do we recover? And then the third one is, how do we be resilient moving forward? Because we have to acknowledge, like right now, the predictions are the jobless rates are around 10% best case, 25% worst case, right? But we also understand that that's not even across the board. Hospitality and tourism, up to 2/3, that's like 66% unemployment. The arts and creative sector, we were just having a conversation with Anne as far as magicians, they're predicting 40% unemployment, 40% jobless rates. And so what we'll see is that certain segments of society are going to be impacted more than others. And so how do they respond, and how do we support them from an entrepreneurial perspective, do differently? And we are already starting to see people do different. We're seeing manufacturing companies transform, provide personal protective equipment. And then there's a narrative around how do we then take that money that's being spent on it and making it resilient moving forward. There's a potential shift to onshoring. Within the hospitality sector, how do we support home delivery? We are seeing a massive shift online. The fact that we're doing this here, and we're having a conversation about Western Australia, and I'm sitting here in my house in Ipswich. So there are fundamental changes that are happening, but then how do we leverage these better to support, especially the traditional businesses that are out there, to do things in new ways? We are seeing cafes then do home deliveries. We're seeing one of the best cases I saw was Jana up in Cairns. She's a photographer, right? And she does weddings and things like that. Well, she's actually spinning up a service where she says, come out to your driveway and get guzzied up, and I'm going to do a photo shoot as a drive-by. And that's actually a whole new business model that she's doing. So it's saying, what do we have, do we work with? And so when we talk about business models, and Veronica's probably walked a few of you through this, first thing we have to do is say, who's my customer? Because quite often we still have the same customer. People still want to eat, even though I can't actually go into a physical location. So how do I have that eating experience? And maybe I still want to be social. So is there something I can do with what I have at core to meet the customer's needs? And the second thing is, what is it that they value? And one of the things we often talk about is nobody wants what you're selling them at the core. Like, we don't want a car. I want status. I want to get from one location to another. I want to feel good about myself while I travel. And so what would it mean if I could give all those things to a person, but I actually have to sell them a car? And so that's why we see things like ride sharing and different cars as a service and transport as a service type models emerging, because people understand that as long as I know who my customer is, and as long as I'm clear about the core thing that they value, maybe then I can shift my model. And so what I encourage people to do during these times is think, what are the new opportunities that emerge? Yes, we have to respond. We have to support businesses immediately so that we can keep the lights on. Two, we have to recover. And so what can we do to help businesses maybe shift their business models a little bit, keep going? But some businesses I talk to have gone through this process. They've explored the customers. They've looked at the value proposition and say, you know what, with what I see for the world in the next 12 months, maybe my business model just can't adapt. So they're actually using some of the funds in their hibernation to create whole new businesses as a result. They'll keep their business in hibernation. They'll take whatever assets they can, pivot a little bit, shift it, and then when they become time to become resilient, how do we get different? And so I mentioned before this emergence of entrepreneur support that we've seen, people like Veronica with Startup Huddle and others who can help businesses think differently. And I think that's one of the valued things that we're going to be seeing come out of this valued services is quite often when you have businesses that have just been doing the same thing maybe for 10, 20 years, they're all of a sudden having to rethink how they do it. having people come along and say, let's help you think differently, let's help you do new. So we can talk on about a few different examples. There's a healthy dog food treat manufacturer over here, Katerina, fantastic model. She started up just manufacturing in her kitchen. She eventually went to manufacture in the local prison, using some of their excess time they had in their kitchen for the prisoners to then, those who were incarcerated, to then create a product. And then she started shipping overseas to Singapore. Well, of course, the prisons were shut down, but then cafes and restaurants are also shut down. So she's shifting her product to cafes and restaurants to manufacturing in there. And so she can still keep the global supply chains. And also then shifting our messaging as we do it. And so while people were having it as a bit of a treat for their dogs, well, right now we're seeing a spike in a few different purchases. Obviously we saw toilet paper, we're also seeing pets. A lot more people are buying pets because they're at home and they want company. And so if you're home and staring at your pet all the time, what do you want to do? You want to give them treats. That's just figuring out how does she market differently. So there's heaps of different ways and different examples we can talk through of people thinking differently, whether it's Jana doing drive-by photography shots in people's driveways, to Katerina finding new ways to market her existing product, manufacturing companies completely changing what they do, or other companies, like I mentioned, completely shutting down and saying, let's take this money, take the funds that are being given to us, and then use that to invest, almost like investing in a new startup idea. So that's just a few top of mind thoughts as far as what we're experiencing now in COVID, some of my background. Happy to take other questions, Veronica. I know that you had a few questions coming in beforehand, and just treating this like an open conversation. Happy to have a yarn.
Thanks very much for that, Chad. That was it's really interesting and quite inspiring to hear, you know, the stories. It's always about the story, isn't it? It's the stories that we connect to, the stories of what business people are doing, how they're doing that pivot thing that everyone's talking about, you know, pivoting. What does that actually mean and what does it look like? And I guess staying motivated and inspired. So guys, just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please use the chat feature to put them through, and we might open up the discussion a little bit as well, seeing as we've just got a small group here tonight. Dave, who couldn't be with us tonight, he was really curious about the post-corona environment, the world, and how entrepreneurship might be seen to be playing a role in rebuilding the society and the economy. We know that, you know, entrepreneurs are all about creating solutions. So Chad, is there anything that you can you know, anything that you've heard about or seen, particularly from that global perspective, around what might be happening there and how we can maybe take that into our kind of local arena?
Yeah, you bet. And like one of the things about entrepreneurship, is it finds a problem to solve, right? And right now we have a global problem to solve. And so around the world, first it was COVID-19. So you had all these people making PPE and things like that. But pretty soon it's going to be on the impacts from COVID-19 and that recovery, as was asked. And so how do we as a society learn how to interact better when we know that social distancing of some form is going to be continuing on? How do we look after each other from a social connectivity and mental health perspective? How do we you know, support some of the consumer engagement, you know, keeping the distancing in stores? And so I think the entrepreneurial approach is going to be, ideally we focus on problems that we're going to solve. I think beforehand what we experienced, and it's one of the criticisms quite often you hear in what we call the startup ecosystems, is that you can come up with a technology that's looking for a problem to solve. And so you get a lot of apps, you get a lot of fun things that maybe don't really have a business model. There's no revenue, there's no people with that problem, or you're trying to make up a problem that your technology can solve. And you find that when there's no pressing need. It's like if you watch a Hollywood movie, you know, some of the most innovative things happen when that asteroid is coming, when that big lizard comes out of the water, when the zombie apocalypse hits. But we have a zombie apocalypse, we have a virus going around and it's out to get us. And so I think those that are going to be successful are going to align themselves with the health industry, with the main dominant narrative of the day. But then when we look at, so then what we can look at is say, what are the trends? What are the things that are going to be different? Obviously, anything, telehealth, virtual meetings, engagement, anything we can do to help what we're doing here. Any technology solution. Obviously, Zoom is a common platform as we all experience, so we're not going to go out and make Zoom, but is there anything that you look at now that we're having this? And if there's ever a challenge where you say, man, that really frustrates me about doing that thing, well, that's something that we can fix. Social distancing, like I mentioned before, new ways of engaging, new ways of entertaining. Just look through all the different sectors whenever anything's going to be impacting, and then you look at that for the problem to solve. So that's one opportunity. And it will be a long-term impact. I think we need to be prepared for that, which means it's also a potential long-term opportunity.
Thanks for that. Another question that has come through is around the timing of, particularly for a startup, what should they be focusing on right now? Like, what should the priority be? I know there's been some discussion in some of my networks around the feeling around selling, like it's almost like there's a reluctance to go out there and do the kind of hard sell, typical kind of marketing, because, you know, people are in a sort of a different frame of mind and a different place. So I guess from a startup perspective, what would be the priority to focus on at the moment, or in these next coming months anyway?
I think it's always the same thing that you focus on. It's the customer. And I know for me, when I've done sales, the only time I feel awkward about selling is if I don't believe the product I'm selling actually solves a problem. And so therefore I'm trying to sell you my product rather than meet your need. No one wants the product you're selling. And if it ever becomes awkward, just check with yourself to say, am I trying to give you something that I may not buy myself? I'll tell you a story. When I was selling printed circuit boards, so those green cards and electronic stuff with all the components and stuff on it, I was selling those. We manufactured them from the ground up, just the bare fiberglass boards. And I had this epiphany. Like, I was, 20-nothing years old with a circuit board in my hand, handing it to an audio company. And the purchasing agent, she looked me in the eye, she was taking it, and I thought, one, I hate circuit boards. I grew up in circuit boards. I hated the smell of them. They took away my Saturday morning cartoons. There was fiberglass in my fingers. I didn't like this thing I was selling her. And then I looked at her and I thought, I don't think you like this either. I don't think there's anybody in the world that says, you know what, I really want to buy a circuit board. Nobody wakes up and thinks that. But what she does want is she wants to go home and see her kids at night. She wants to know that her product line and everything in her business is working really well. She wants to know that she looks good in front of her bosses. She wants to know all sorts of things that my product can give her. And so as soon as I realized that, as soon as I knew that I was making her life easier, I knew that I was giving her peace of mind. I knew that she had confidence in the quality of her total product because of my component in it. I could sell it to anybody. And then we started developing things on top of that. We did online ordering. We did drop shipping from overseas so they can get lower prices on shorter terms. We started really innovating in our business because we got very, very clear on the problem we're solving, not the product we were building. And so I think that's the same no matter what. And if we get very clear on that, and then the other thing I would say is sell one. I borrow this from, there's another guy up in Bundaberg, Daniel Johnson, and he goes on about this quite well. All you want to do is sell one, because tomorrow, you're going to sell two. And the day after that, you might sell three. And that's fine if you wait a couple of days and then you got to sell 5 and you got to sell 10. And that's a startup, that's scale. And you think, oh, well, how can I do that if it's so hard to sell one? Well, that's the challenge. The challenge is how do I focus on the problem I'm solving? And then how do I try and solve that even better and more and bigger? And that's the startup mentality. And I think that's during a crisis just as much as normal times. I think we lose sight of it when we don't have the pressure of a crisis. But now, when pressure of a crisis, we think, oh, I'll tweak this feature, I'll adapt this a little bit, I'll try and find out if they need something else. When it's a crisis, it gets everything so very crystal clear because we don't have anywhere to go.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I would agree wholeheartedly. It is always about the customer, but particularly now, and I've found even in my own business, and I'm sure some of you will have found too, that this situation actually forces you to go back to the client and to the customer and ask, what do you need at this time? And I know for me, it's been really interesting to review the value of what I'm actually providing in my product and service, and to understand that it may not necessarily be the perception of value to the client or customer may not necessarily be the same as my own perception of that value. And it's a time to kind of be quite humble and be in service. And I guess that's where some of us might struggle with those values of being in service, but also, doing the sales thing that we do as business people. But it is very important to be providing the services that your customers need right now, because their needs may have and probably will have changed. So that might be something that some of you are working through at the moment, as well as how best to serve my customers and clients in these new sort of circumstances and this new environment that we're all working in. But I guess that's where the successful businesses will be able to be adaptable enough to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think another thing with that is like this. I think we need to be real about the fact that this is a stressful time. Like there's a lot of anxiety out there. People are going to know people that are not going to make it through the COVID-19. That's just a reality. People are going to get unwell. Some people are going to pass away. Businesses are going to close. And we feel for them. As business owners and as entrepreneurs and as people trying to make it in the business world, it can help to just say, one, what is the difference I want to make? And two, how do I treat it as an experiment? Because none of us have been here before. We can give ourselves heaps of grace that we're all just learning as I go. And if it didn't work today, that's all right. It didn't work today for a lot of different people. Let's try something different tomorrow. And if we treat it as an experiment, it's not success or failure. It's just, did I learn? And so tomorrow, did I learn a little bit more? Can I get a little bit further? Well, that didn't work. Okay, well, maybe I'll shift to something else. But if we focus on, am I making a difference? Am I solving a problem rather than am I building an empire? And am I trying to build a business? It's often the stories you hear time and again isn't about people that said, hey, I set out to build a big business and so I built a big business. It's people who say, I set out to solve a problem, and even though the solution changed a whole bunch of times, in the end I end up solving a big problem. And by treating it as an experiment, it can reduce the anxiety where I'm not so attached to the actual product I'm building. I'm attached to always unwaveringly trying to find, am I making a difference in the world?
Yeah. So, and Chad, what are your thoughts about Australia, I guess, in general? It's in terms of the economy and the future for business in Australia. Do you see have any insights around that?
That's a pretty big question. I don't know if
yeah.
I'll add my opinion, which is exactly that as far as the economy of a nation. It's look, I think particularly within startups and entrepreneurship, by all the global comparisons, we have one of the higher fears of failure. We also believe that we have everything we need to start a business. We have the highest in the world rates of intrapreneurship or entrepreneurship in a business or in an existing corporation. So if you add all of that up together, my take on it, my opinion, loosely held, is that we've had whatever it is, 20 plus years of not having a downturn. We've had it really good, which what that does is we have a belief in our capability, but we're afraid to fail because we haven't experienced failure. Well, right now we can't say that anymore. We can't say we've never had a downturn because we're about ready to experience a big one. But I think resilience happens as you go through these things. I often share the story of the Indigenous up in Canada, a century ago, who entire tribes used to pick up and move every generation. And they did that, even though if they stayed in one place, they could farm it, they could make it theirs and secure and protect the borders, but they actually physically moved so they could learn and teach the next generation what it was like to move. And so I think we are going to be experiencing that. We're going to learn how to do new. I think Australia is in a relatively good place as far as being able to support entrepreneurs. It'll be interesting to see if we follow suit of a few other nations where they are having big stimulus packages specific to startups. We've gone kind of broad stroke with the JobKeeper support. I think more could be done in order to support emerging companies and invest specifically into tech, invest into new enterprises, because that really is the future. It's the jobs 10 years from now. I do a daily review of the Financial Review, you see these companies that talk about getting the funding, these what they call the unicorns, the billion-dollar valuation companies, and you look at when they started, and invariably it is 2010, 2012, 2015, and so you do the math, and the stories I'm going to read about in the Fin Review in 5 years are the companies that are starting now. So how do we support companies starting now and do more companies? Because it is a numbers game as well. We need more companies trying to start. We need the people, on this Zoom call to be able to give it a go now, because you're going to be the articles I read in 5 years. So please give it a go now, but we need an entire, like that ecosystem around to support you, to help you with the ideas and with the networks and the connections to help you do it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think for most of us, we're really focused on sort of the day to day at the moment, and how do we get through today and how do we get through the week? And it's very difficult to think too far ahead because things change so quickly. I know for myself personally, I'll put a plan together, I'll even start to implement that plan, and then some authority makes an announcement, and all of a sudden that plan doesn't work anymore for my clients. And so, there's opportunity, and there's also, I guess, parts of the plan that just aren't going to work. How far ahead, in terms of like a startup or a business that might have just started within the last 12 months, how far ahead should we be planning now? That I'm thinking the 12-month plan has just gone out of the window. How do we kind of predict, what the situation might be like in 12 months' time? Are there any particular, do you think, Chad, there are any particular skill sets, for example, that startups could be focusing on developing through this time, or ideologies, or even areas, industry areas that that we could focus on? I mean, obviously there's some that have taken a real hit, but there are others that have just gone ballistic. So
yeah, and again, I think it's more the business model than the plan. Like the business model is a point in time as far as how does my business work, which is being completely transformed. And you're right, it's very difficult to plan on that. And then the plan says, well, based on my business model, where am I going to go in 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 5 years? And the more uncertainty is, the more complexity there is, which of course right now there's heaps of complexity, lots of uncertainty, the more difficult it is to plan. But if we have a solid model, and that model says, do I have a customer? Do I know what their problem is? Do I know what value it is that I provide to them? If I get very clear on that, the model emerges. So for example, I was talking to a manufacturing company, and they service the mining industry, the resource sector, and about 60 staff. And they've been disrupted. But we got down to the very core of being able to keep the lights on. They keep the lights on in industrial sectors, both through staffing, through custom manufacturing, through delivering product, through solar panels, through all sorts of things. But once you get clear on that, we then started exploring. When this whole thing happened, what they did is they transitioned to creating these screens for the retail sector to protect them. And but that process they went through, it was because a mate of a customer gave them a ring and said, hey, look, can you make these screens for me? And so they made a couple of custom screens, and then somebody else found out about them. Next thing you know, they got a whole assembly line making these custom screens, which kept their business afloat and kept some of their 60 employees. But the product here isn't those screens. The product is somebody coming with an idea, going to them saying, can you do this thing? And then them building it. And so what we're actually talking about doing is having that as a separate product to meet the needs. So it's just an example of a skill set of saying, how do I rapidly able to create new ideas out of business models rather than getting so attached to the product? I think that's going to be one of the key skills entrepreneurs can have, is being able to do that rapidly and swap and change the different parts of their business out so they can quickly, as you mentioned, pivot.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've come across when I've been coaching and mentoring, particularly startups, but even small businesses, is that they sometimes become very focused. The vision becomes very focused on a particular product or service because that's what the business owner enjoys or is passionate about or is good at, and that can often leave them without a customer base and without a business when they can't be really focused on the solution to the problem. So the solutions will often change when the problems change for the client or the customer. So yeah, that's pretty important to be able to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or be willing to give up your business. And I've had to do that before, when I realized that I didn't want to make the changes that were required to stay in a particular business. So it's been a conscious decision to move on and move forward and do something else. But they're the decisions you sometimes have to make.
Yeah, Veronica, you raised a really good point. Like, especially during this time, when is it okay to stop?
Yeah.
When is it okay to let go? And part of that, I guess, conversations with people like you who lead in your region, reaching out to people. Even now we have a global network, and anybody on this call can happy to have a chat with them. But it's talking it through and saying, like, what is the real feedback I'm getting? What is the feedback I'm getting from the market? What is the feedback I'm getting from the customers? And what feedback am I getting from myself? I mean, all of us, I'm sure, have either been or spoken to small business owners or startups, and the anxiety and the stress, and they're just like, and you think, maybe this particular path isn't the right thing for right now. The flip side of that, of course, is you never know if just around the corner it's going to be, you're going to break through. Because there's heaps of stories like that. Oh, I was about ready to quit and throw in the towel, and this thing came along, and this thing happened. So part of it is just leaning into it. You rest in the suffering as they talk about it, and just really observing it, saying what's really happening here, what's triggering me, and just going through a few frameworks like that, and then finding other people to be a bit of a sense check. Is this just me blowing this up, or how do I break this down to component pieces pragmatically before you make that decision on one way or the other?
Yeah, and I think that staying connected and connecting in with the groups and the networks that are going to provide that support through this time, it's even more critical that something like a startup huddle exists and is reaching out and trying to find a format that is going to serve the needs of its community as well. So hopefully by introducing this type of format where we've got some people from the ecosystem that can come and give us that bit of a broader perspective, and people who are there to support the startup and entrepreneurship ecosystem is one way that we can provide for those needs of our community at the moment. So on that note, I'd like to offer the opportunity to any of you to turn your microphone on, and if you've got something that you'd like to share with Chad, or a question that you'd like to ask, or a comment that you'd like to make, please feel free to do so.
I'm interested in understanding, coming from a government perspective, we're not very good at change, we're not very adaptable, we're very risk averse. And in this situation, all of those things can lead to, inertia at the best of times. But what do you think the government sector can learn from entrepreneurs in order to adapt to this situation and provide good outcomes and good support?
Yeah, thanks for that, Christy. And it's an interesting conversation, because during this time, like I take those three things that you mentioned, and I said, my view is, thank goodness government is secure, thank goodness government is stable, and thank goodness government doesn't necessarily change on a whim. But by the same token, I have seen government incredibly adaptable. And there are certain levers that they have pulled rapidly, federal, state, and local, aligning the three. And knowing which ones they are, learning from each other. We had a local government webinar a couple of weeks ago with some good ideas. I think definitely reaching out to your peers, both, and the three types of organizations that perform in particularly in the regional area, which is your local government, your economic development organizations, and your innovation support organizations. And so really creating a portfolio of support, because there's some things government just, like, they have to keep the lights on. And so they're worried about rates, they're worried about established businesses, they're so focused on just being that resource. But then there's quite a few areas where they're reaching out to the economic development organizations, the Qld development group per se, or others, where they're able to maybe be a bit more adaptable. And then there's other ones, again, who are even more flexible, but quite often under-resourced. And so how do we create a portfolio approach? And then also talk to the peers in other regions, which I can introduce you to a half dozen, which I'm sure you may already know, of other economic development officers, other community development officers, other mayors and councillors in regions, because we're all just trying to figure it out together. So definitely tap into those networks, and facilitate. Like, again, now more than ever, we don't have to control. All we have to do is be a support. Let our regions know we are encouraging and supporting all types of business, and facilitating a broad range of conversations, because you have a lot on your plate.
And Christy, I'm looking forward to when you're coming back to have a chat to us in a month or so time. So guys, we'll have a bit of a regional perspective, which will be really, really useful. So thanks for that, Christy. Anybody else want to ask a question while we've got Chad here? Everyone's good? Everyone's quiet tonight?
I'll and also leverage the resources that we have available to us. We don't have to create everything on our own. For example, two of them I often speak of. One of them is a program called Startup On-Ramp. And Startup On-Ramp is it's like what they call a pre-accelerator or a business ideation type program, where someone like Veronica can get trained up, and then she can facilitate people through a 12-week program. It's with a cohort, and now because of obviously everything's virtual, you can go through with a national cohort of people thinking the same thing, like, how do I start a new business? And it is a startup. And so when we say startup, it's someone who's using technology in a way to get to a wider audience. Because what we want to do is want to get the ideas from inside a region out and get the dollars from outside a region in. So global from day one, export ready, using technology in some way, getting that customer overseas somehow. And so Startup On-Ramp is a great program that helps you to do it, and it's delivered virtually, which a local government can then support someone in your region to be able to help facilitate and deliver that for local impact. And so that's been pretty successful. They're all over Australia. And the second one is a program called Peak Persona. And Aaron and Peter run that, which is more focused on the founder. As we were talking about personal resilience before, and what that does, it gets people through a cohort to essentially get into daily habits, to get some daily structure about their lives, which right now can be more important than ever. And it gets you with a cohort of people, some personal accountability, but very much founder focused, startup focused, entrepreneur mindset, because it is a new mindset we need to develop. So a combination of those, and how do we support maybe a suite of those in our region as an experiment to then take people? And because I think local government, they experiment with the regions much like a business experiments with their product. And I think it's okay to try a few different things, a bit of a portfolio as we move forward.
Yeah, that's actually really good. Thanks for that, Chad. I think just the way that we think about doing business and entrepreneurship and startup in our regions at the moment does need to shift, because all of those existing services and the systems and everything that was happening is no longer in existence. So rethinking that from a regional perspective, I think, is going to be really important. And hopefully, as we get more of our guests on board and we find out what's happening, we'll get a bit of an idea or a picture of well, one, is anything happening, and secondly, if it is, what does it look like, and how can we connect in with that? But thanks for that. I've written those down, so we'll get some information shared with the community about those. So thanks for that, Chad.
You bet.
So if nobody else has got anything in particular that they'd like to ask, I think we'll wrap up the session now. Thanks very much everybody for attending, and a big thanks to Chad for coming on board and sharing his expertise and his wisdom and his insight all the way from Ipswich. I think we in WA here, I think we're sort of almost like our own country now. We've isolated ourselves completely from the rest of Australia. So we've always been quite isolated, but even more so. But I tell you what, it's working. Whatever we've been doing, it is working. And, we are relatively safe and well here. And hopefully, that's from a health perspective, and hopefully from an economic perspective, we'll be able to bounce back sooner rather than later. I was saying to Chad earlier, I noticed that DPM Cafe, one of our local cafes on the foreshore, has announced that they'll be opening as of this week. So that's a really interesting development, and the opportunities there. Hopefully people won't be too scared to go out and buy a cup of coffee from them. I think, being a hole in the wall type model is probably going to work in their favour, whereas some of the bigger cafes and restaurants, I think, are going to probably have to wait a little while before they can start operations again and having customers come in. So, look, I think it's a time for optimism, and, by nature, entrepreneurs tend to be optimistic and they tend to be opportunistic. And as long as we can all keep ourselves happy and relatively, steady and stable from a mental point of view, I think there's lots of good things that can actually come out of this situation. And staying connected, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do for each other and for our community and for our region. So I do thank you all for making the commitment to be here this evening. And I hope you all come back again next Monday when we have Julie from the Business Advisory Southwestern Peel, who will be hopefully sharing some local insights as well. I know that they've continued to be quite busy through this time, so it'll be good to get some updates from her as well. So it's good night from me and good night from Chad. Have a fabulous week, everybody, and I will let you know where this video will be uploaded and where you can access it as well. So see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chad.
Appreciate it, Chad.
Yeah.
Thank
You
you.
bet.